Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how Priti Patel had a close shave in an interview this morning as a journalist was asking her to apologise for, as her own party leader put it, not having a plan for Brexit growth. That could have been really awkward for her. But fortunately, the journalist in question was Tory shill Laura Kuenssberg. So after asking a genuinely awkward question that could have had Priti Patel squirming, she completely let her off the hook without any follow-up questions, as usual. But it does still show us what might happen if a real journalist ever got to pose such a question to someone like Priti Patel, who was right at the heart of the Brexit government and is now being thrown under the bus by her current party leader. But first, for daily political commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you stay notified. So, as Kemi Badenoch tries to bridge the gap between her party and the voters who abandoned it, she has to obviously acknowledge some mistakes. Of course she does. One of the claims she has made is that the Conservatives went ahead with leaving the EU before they had a plan for economic growth. Now, if Badenoch had a clean sweep of the old guard in assembling her front bench, this would not be at all controversial. People do draw some spurious conclusions from Brexit polling, but one thing which is absolutely clear is the vast majority do not think it has gone well. A clear majority regret leaving the EU, and there's a growing trend towards wanting to rejoin. So although Badenoch tried to claim that Brexit had worked and was going great while she was in government, she has had to change her tune in opposition. That is not to say that she's changed the party's position fundamentally on whether Brexit is good or not, but she has accepted that the way it was implemented was poor, incompetent even. Which, of course, is yet another way in which she's effectively parroting Nigel Farage's lines. But you could argue that in this particular case, Badenoch didn't really have much choice. She cannot possibly plot a path which involves claiming Brexit is working as intended. So she had a choice. And this will be the same choice that her successor will have to make when Badenoch falls. The first is to say that Brexit itself has turned out badly. Now, you can make excuses. You can say, well, there were things we didn't know at the time. The global markets have reordered themselves since the pandemic, which you couldn't have predicted before COVID. And it is true that has made Brexit worse, sure. But one choice remains just saying that the hard Brexit has failed and that closer ties with the EU are the modern reality. So the Tories could choose that. The second choice is, as Badenoch has chosen and probably was going to have to choose, to say that the hard Brexit just needed to be implemented more intelligently and it would have been fine. So Badenoch has opted for the second choice, even though it actually helps Farage. But, slight fly in the ointment, it means attacking the architects of Boris Johnson's hard Brexit as having failed to do something as obvious as, have a plan for it. This would be fine if they were all out the way. But Priti Patel, who was a massive part of that Johnson project, is a senior member of Badenoch's shadow cabinet. She's the shadow foreign secretary. So Laura Kuenssberg asked Patel to apologise for not having a plan for Brexit. Well, this should have been it. Kuenssberg had her over a barrel. Either admit that she was a senior member of a government who left the EU without having a plan for it, which would be a shocking dereliction of duty, or call out her own leader for not knowing what she was talking about. There was no way out of this. Except, of course, this was Laura Kuenssberg and she never presses her advantage when she's up against a Tory. So Priti Patel said, oh yeah, there was a plan. There was a plan in the form of legislation. So we had plans, we had legislation to physically leave the EU. A couple of things to say about this. First of all, drafting legislation is not a plan. Ministers don't even do that. You just tell officials what law you want to pass and they draft it for you. You as the minister just get MPs to vote it through then. There is no plan needed for legislation. Legislation is how you implement a plan. It's not the plan itself. Second, Badenoch was talking about a plan for growth, not for just leaving the EU. Leaving the EU was not the difficult part. The difficult part was leaving the EU without doing to the country what Annie Wilkes did to Paul Sheldon, right? And Kuenssberg let Patel fanny about going on about this legislation and then conceding that Badenoch, but you have to distinguish when we're talking about, the long-term planning, that wasn't there, where a real journalist would have hammered her at that point. Because the point being made was that there was no plan to grow the UK economy. No one's saying they didn't know how to leave the EU. We've left the EU. Obviously, they knew how to leave the EU. What we're saying is they didn't know how to grow the economy after leaving the EU. That is the charge Badenoch is making against people like her own shadow foreign secretary, and that is the charge Patel failed to deny. Because think about what exactly Badenoch is claiming here. She's not claiming that the plan didn't work. She's not saying they had this plan, didn't work, we should have had another plan. No, she's claiming that there was no plan, that it never existed in the first place. And by the way, this is true. If someone were to really pin Patel down and say, show us the plan, she wouldn't be able to. Because in amongst the panic, what Patel said was true, truer than she would have liked. She and the rest of Boris Johnson's cabinet only had one plan: to leave the EU. Beyond that, they had nothing. The only member of the cabinet even working on practical plans was Michael Gove, but because every time he presented the cabinet, it was like, oh, Brexit Jesus wouldn't do this. They were too pragmatic for them. So Johnson eventually sacked him, brought in Frosty the No Man to arse everything up even worse. Oh, this is much better. The Daily Mail are delighted. In fact, the Conservatives are demanding inquiries into all and sundry right now. But if there is to be yet another inquiry into anything, because there are loads going off at the moment, then maybe it should be the way in which we left the EU and dealt with the immediate aftermath. You know, in the interest of learning lessons and not doing anything that's stupid again. But this will be an opportunity for any professional journalist, should Patel ever be careless enough to go anywhere near them. Why didn't the cabinet she was a senior member of insist on a plan for economic growth before leaving the EU, or at least the single market and customs union? Because Boris Johnson's government had two bites of the cherry. You could say after the election, well, they had to leave the EU fairly quickly. But even after they left the EU, they were not forced into rushing out of the single market and customs union. Didn't have to leave at all until we were sure everything was in place. But we didn't leave the EU or the single market or the customs union because it was the best thing to do for the country at that time. We left because it was politically expedient for the Conservative Party. Or so they thought at the time. Hasn't worked out well for them. And the Tories have been blaming the public for voting for it whenever they've been put on the spot for their handling. And it was no different for Patel this morning. In amongst the babbling that Tory Laura let her get away with, Patel also talked about how it was the public who wanted them to do it. But the Tories are vulnerable on this point now. The official Tory position is that the Tory government went ahead with Brexit without a plan for growth. Not just that they had a plan, didn't work, and maybe should have had another. No, they didn't have any plan for growth. Any Tory MP denying this is going against their own party's formal position. And any Tory MP denying it, if they're going to call their glorious leader a liar, which sometimes they do, ought to be able to point out, where is the plan then? Because I'll tell you something, no plan was ever published. So if a plan ever existed, it was kept very, very secret and remains secret even today. So in reality, there was no plan. Kemi Badenoch is right. And what's more, the Tories still don't have a plan for post-Brexit economic growth because Badenoch hasn't published one of those either. So the official Tory position is now this. There was no plan for growth with Brexit, and there still isn't now. And given that the Tories have chosen to define everything they do through the prism of Brexit, you know, and by their own admission, they never had an economic plan for Brexit and still don't. They're basically admitting they don't have a plan for anything. Journalists should probe Conservatives more on this point. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll see you later.